The moment Officer Emily Carter realized she had stopped the wrong man, the rain was already too loud to hide it. Red and blue light washed across the wet concrete, turning the parking lot outside Hayes Urban Systems into a shifting field of glass and color. People had slowed under the awning, half hidden by the storm, watching the scene unfold with the uneasy silence that comes when nobody knows whether to step forward or stay back. A black sedan idled near the curb, its headlights cutting two pale lanes through the rain, and beside it stood a tall black man in a dark overcoat, one hand open at his side, the other still near the car door he had been reaching for seconds earlier. He did not look frightened. He did not look angry. What unsettled everyone was how calm he looked, as if he had lived through this exact moment too many times to waste energy on surprise. Officer Carter's voice came sharp through the weather, hard and clipped with authority, demanding answers before the first real question had even been asked. She had noticed him alone near an expensive vehicle, near the executive entrance, near a tower of steel and tinted glass where men in $1,000 coats usually left with drivers, not by themselves and not looking like him. That was the story her mind had built in an instant, neat and confident and wrong. The man lifted his eyes to hers with a steadiness that only seemed to irritate her more. Rain clung to his coat collar. Water ran down the side of his face in thin silver lines. "Officer," he said quietly, almost gently, "your camera is on." It should have been nothing more than a reminder, one adult speaking to another, but the sentence landed like a challenge in the space between them. Somewhere behind the glass doors, security had begun moving. Under the awning, a young employee lowered her phone, then lifted it again. The city seemed to hold its breath. Officer Carter took a step closer, shoulders squared, every motion broadcasting control she had not yet earned. The man did not retreat. He simply drew a slow breath and let it out, as though he were forcing himself to remain patient inside a moment that had already insulted him. His face carried the tired dignity of someone who knew exactly what assumption had placed him here. He glanced once toward the building, his building, though no one around them seemed to understand that yet. The illuminated logo above the entrance glowed through the rain in white letters 3 feet tall, Hayes. Still, nobody connected the name to the man standing beneath it. Not yet. The wind shifted. A paper cup rolled across the pavement. Somewhere a siren wailed 2 blocks away, fading into the wet dark. Then, in one small careless motion, something slipped loose from the inner pocket of the man's coat and fell to the ground. It landed in a shallow sheet of rainwater with a soft plastic click, flipped once, and lay open beneath the flashing lights. Officer Carter's eyes dropped. So did everyone else's. For one suspended second, no one moved. The badge holder gleamed silver against the black pavement, and behind its clear window, beneath the company seal and the strip of executive black, was a name that changed the temperature of the entire night. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. No one spoke at first. The rain kept falling in silver threads through the police lights, and the whole parking lot seemed to shrink around that single card lying open on the pavement. Officer Emily Carter stared at it as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something easier to survive, but they did not. Malcolm Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. The name sat there in clean white print beneath the company seal, impossible to explain away. Her hand, which had been so certain a moment earlier, lowered by an inch. Then another. Across the curb, the glass doors swept open with a hush, and a man in a Navy security jacket came out at a near run, one palm lifted against the rain. Luis Moreno, head of building security, took one look at Malcolm, then one look at the identification at Emily's feet, and his expression changed from concern to alarm. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked, his voice tight but controlled. Malcolm did not answer right away. He reached down, picked up the badge holder himself, and brushed the rainwater from its edge with his thumb. Even in that moment, there was nothing hurried in him. He moved with the practiced restraint of a man who had spent years learning that calm, unsettled people more than anger ever could. Water dripped from his sleeve. His tie was slightly crooked now, and a dark strand of hair had fallen loose near his forehead, but his posture remained straight, almost formal, as if he refused to let the night reduce him in front of strangers. Behind Luis, 2 more figures hurried out from the building under a black umbrella that did little good against the wind. One was Dana Brooks from Human Resources, still wearing her conference lanyard from the late board meeting upstairs. The other was a junior attorney from the legal team, his face pale before he even reached the curb. Dana stopped cold when she saw Malcolm standing in the rain beside the patrol car. "Oh my God," she whispered, and then louder, with the sharp authority of someone whose fear had turned into focus. "Turn that body camera over to internal affairs immediately." Emily opened her mouth, but whatever explanation had formed there dissolved before it reached the air. Around them, phones were still up. A young woman under the awning had both hands wrapped around hers now, recording with the frozen attention people get when they realize they are witnessing the exact second a life takes a turn. Malcolm finally looked at Emily, and what shook her most was not rage. It was disappointment. It was the kind that made a person feel small without a single raised word. "I asked for respect," he said softly. That was all. His voice was low enough that the people at the edge of the scene leaned in to hear it, and somehow that quiet made the sentence heavier. Emily swallowed and glanced toward the company tower. The white haze letters burned above the entrance, 50 feet high against the wet black sky, a name she had seen from half a mile away and never once connected to the man she had judged in seconds. Louise stepped closer to Malcolm with an umbrella, but Malcolm did not take it. He kept his eyes on Emily for one beat longer, then turned toward the building. Dana fell into step beside him, already speaking in a hushed rush about witnesses, reports, and medical staff, but Malcolm said only one thing before the doors closed behind him. "Make sure the truth is what gets written down." In the parking lot, with the rain still tapping against the cruiser roof and the camera still blinking red on her chest, Emily Carter stood absolutely still, and for the first time that night, she understood that the worst part of what had happened was not that she had mistaken a powerful man for someone powerless. It was that she would have treated him the same either way. By 8:05 the next morning, the rain had vanished so completely it felt like the storm had never happened. But inside Hayes Urban Systems, the air still carried that strange pressure that settles over a building after everyone learns the same terrible thing at once. Elevators opened and closed in polished silence. Dress shoes crossed marble floors without their usual rhythm. Even the voices at reception had softened, as if sound itself needed permission to move through the lobby. Malcolm Hayes stepped through the revolving doors with a small bandage near his mouth and a paper cup of black coffee in one hand. He wore a charcoal suit, a white shirt, and the same calm expression he had carried the night before, but there was something quieter in him now, something colder. Employees looked up from security gates and tablet screens and coffee carts, then immediately looked away, ashamed of being caught looking at all. Not because he appeared weak, because he did not, because he walked with the same measured pace he always had, and that made the contrast harder to bear. Dana Brooks met him near the private elevator bank with a folder held against her chest. She had not slept much. It showed in the shadows beneath her eyes and the clipped precision of her voice. "Internal Affairs has opened the file," she said. "The footage from the parking garage and the entry cameras has been preserved. Legal has already contacted the city." Malcolm nodded once. "And the witnesses?" "We have statements from 6 employees so far," Dana said. "More are coming in." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "The officer has been placed on administrative leave pending review." Malcolm took a sip of coffee and watched sunlight move across the glass wall at the end of the lobby. It cast long pale bars across the marble like a second set of doors no one could open. He said nothing for a moment. Then he asked, very quietly, "Did she file her report before she knew who I was?" Dana understood immediately why that question mattered. "Yes," she said. Malcolm turned and looked at her fully for the first time that morning. "Good," he replied. "Then we will know what she believed before fear taught her how to edit it." Up on the 29th floor, the boardroom still smelled faintly of coffee, printer toner, and old cedar from the wall panels. The previous night's meeting notes sat untouched beside a projection screen that had not been lowered. Malcolm placed his cup near the head chair, but did not sit. He stood at the window instead, looking out over the city he had spent 15 years helping rebuild block by block, contract by contract, school by school. From up here, the streets looked clean and orderly, every lane painted, every corner planned. But he knew how quickly order vanished at ground level when certain faces entered the frame. Luis Moreno knocked softly and stepped in. "Sir, there is something you need to see." He handed Malcolm a company phone already open to a local news clip. Someone had leaked 20 seconds of shaky video from under the awning. No names yet. No context. Just flashing lights, rain, a raised voice, and Malcolm standing still while the headline at the bottom asked whether another excessive force investigation was coming to the city. Malcolm watched the clip once, then handed the phone back. More than the image, it was the comment count beneath it that caught Dana's eye. Thousands already. Luis exhaled slowly. This is spreading fast. Malcolm finally moved toward the table and set both hands on its polished edge. His reflection stared back at him from the dark wood, steady and unsmiling. Let it spread, he said. If people are finally looking, then let them see everything. At 11:37, the first official statement from the city reached Hayes Urban Systems, and by 11:38, everyone on the executive floor knew it was written to protect the department, not the truth. Dana Brooks brought the printed copy into Malcolm's office with two hands, as if the paper itself carried weight. Sunlight poured across the hardwood floor in wide golden bars, warm and almost gentle, but the language on the page was cold enough to make the room feel smaller. Preliminary encounter. Lawful stop. Subject became verbally resistant. No mention of the company badge. No mention of witness footage. No mention of the fact that Malcolm had identified the active camera before the officer escalated the encounter. Malcolm read every line without changing expression. He sat behind a desk of dark walnut and brushed one thumb along the edge of the document as though feeling for the grain beneath the words. Dana stood across from him, tense and motionless, waiting for anger that never came. Instead, he set the statement down with almost painful care and asked for the body camera chain of custody report, the timestamps from the garage security feed, and the exact minute the officer submitted her version of events. Dana blinked once, then nodded and turned immediately toward the door. She had worked beside Malcolm for 7 years, long enough to know that his quiet questions usually meant someone else was about to discover how much detail they had overlooked. By noon, the conference room beside Malcolm's office held a different kind of weather. Legal pads, laptops, sealed evidence requests, and printed witness statements covered the long table in measured rows. The air hummed with climate control and low voices. Luis Moreno stood near the screen at the front of the room, one hand wrapped around a tablet, replaying the parking lot footage frame by frame. Dana sat to Malcolm's right. The junior attorney from legal sat to his left with a sharpened pencil that had gone untouched for 10 full minutes. On the wall monitor, the image paused on the moment before everything changed. Malcolm beneath the white glow of the company's sign, rain silvering his coat. Officer Emily Carter squared in front of him with the certainty of someone who had already decided what she was seeing. Freeze it there, Malcolm said. Luis obeyed. The room went still. Malcolm rose from his chair and stepped closer to the screen. There was no bitterness in his face, but there was clarity now, and it was sharper than anger could have been. What do you notice? He asked. The attorney cleared his throat. She approaches before verifying ownership of the vehicle. Dana added. She ignores the building identification behind him. Luis tapped the screen. And here, sir, your voice is calm. Yours remains calm the entire time. Malcolm kept his eyes on the frozen image. He was not studying himself. He was studying the shape of assumption, the distance between evidence and instinct, the speed at which a person could be turned into a threat by another person's story. Then he asked the question no one else in the room had thought to ask first. Where is the first second she saw me? Luis looked confused. Malcolm turned to face them. Not the first second the camera started recording. The first second she decided who I was. Silence settled over the table. Even the attorney stopped pretending to write. Dana slowly exhaled. That is not in the footage, she said. Exactly, Malcolm replied. His voice remained low, but the truth inside it landed hard. That is where this really began. He walked back to the table and rested his palms against the polished surface. The city would investigate conduct. The department would investigate procedure. The news would investigate outrage. But Malcolm was staring at something wider and older than all of it. Outside the glass wall, downtown traffic crawled through noon light, bright and orderly and indifferent. Inside the room, every person present understood they were no longer preparing for a routine legal response. They were preparing to confront the part nobody liked to name. A soft knock came at the door, and Ava Reed, the young employee from the awning, stepped inside, clutching her phone with both hands. Her face was pale, but her voice did not shake. "I think I have the part before the part everyone else saw," she said. Ava Reed stood just inside the conference room door like she was afraid the air itself might reject what she had come to say. Both hands wrapped around her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She was 24, new to the company, usually the kind of employee who apologized before asking a question, but something in her face had shifted overnight. Fear was still there, but it had been forced to make room for resolve. Malcolm turned toward her and, with the same steady calm he had carried through every hour since the parking lot, invited her to come in. She crossed the room slowly, her sneakers soundless against the carpet, and placed the phone on the table as if she were setting down evidence in a courtroom. "I started recording before anyone else did," she said. "I did not even realize it at first. I was texting my sister about missing the bus, and when I heard the siren and saw the lights, I switched to video." Dana reached for the device, but Malcolm lifted one hand, not to stop her, only to slow the room down. "Let her tell it in order," he said. Ava swallowed and nodded. She looked at Malcolm for half a second, then away again, ashamed on behalf of something she had only witnessed. "You had just walked out of the employee garage," she said quietly. "You had your keys in one hand and your bag over your shoulder. You were not doing anything unusual. You looked tired." The room remained completely still. Luis dimmed the lights without being asked, and the city outside the glass wall faded into a pale reflection. Ava tapped the screen. The footage began with the shaky angle of someone holding a phone too low, rain streaking the lens, the blur of headlights cutting across wet pavement. Then the frame steadied. Malcolm appeared near the curb, dark coat, lowered gaze, moving with the unremarkable rhythm of a man trying to get home. The patrol car rolled in from the left. It did not hesitate. It curved toward him in a clean, sharp line and stopped too close. No one in the room spoke. They watched Officer Emily Carter step out and look at Malcolm before she said a single word. That look lasted less than 2 seconds. It was brief enough that a careless viewer might miss it. But once seen, it was impossible to unsee. There was decision in it. Conclusion. A whole story written and sealed before any conversation began. Then came her first sentence, clear even through rain and distance. "Sir, step away from that vehicle." Malcolm asked, in an even voice, "Is there a problem, officer?" Not defensive, not hostile, simply surprised. Ava paused the video and looked around the table. "That is what I needed you to hear first," she said. "Not what happened later." That. The room stayed silent another long beat. Dana lowered her eyes. The young attorney pressed his lips together and finally wrote something down. Luis let out a breath through his nose, slow and rough. Malcolm kept his gaze fixed on the frozen frame, on the exact moment he had become suspicious in someone else's mind without earning it, without inviting it, without even knowing it had happened yet. He did not speak for so long that Ava seemed to worry she had done something wrong. Then, he nodded once, not to the video, but to her. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with enough force to make Ava's shoulders drop for the first time since entering the room. Malcolm straightened and placed both hands on the conference table, fingertips resting near the edge of the phone. "This is what they always miss," he said softly. "Not the public moment. The private assumption that makes the public moment possible." Sunlight shifted across the floor as a cloud moved outside, and for a second the room brightened. Dana looked up at him. "What do you want us to do next?" Malcolm turned toward the window, where the city gleamed as if truth were easy in daylight. Then he answered in a tone so calm it made everyone sit straighter. "We stop reacting to the symptom," he said. "We name the disease." The room did not move for several seconds after Malcolm said it. "We name the disease." The sentence seemed to settle into the polished wood, the glass walls, the coffee gone cold beside legal pads and sealed evidence requests. Outside, the city shone with the sharp brightness that comes after rain. Every window lit clean, every street pretending order had always been there. Inside the conference room, that illusion had already been broken. Dana was the first to speak, though even her voice came out softer than usual, as if she understood that what stood before them now was larger than a corporate response and heavier than a single incident report. "If we say that publicly," she asked, "are you prepared for what comes next?" Malcolm did not answer right away. He walked to the window and looked down at the avenue nearly 30 stories below, where yellow cabs moved in slow lines and pedestrians crossed against the light with coffee cups in their hands, small and distant and ordinary. From this height, no one could tell who felt safe and who had learned to hide fear inside routine. Sunlight touched the side of his face and caught the edge of the bandage near his mouth. He kept one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly against the glass. "I have been prepared for what comes next since I was 12, he said. The words were not dramatic. That made them harder to hear. Luis lowered his eyes. Ava sat very still with her phone in her lap, like she had suddenly been allowed to see a private room inside a person she had only known from elevator nods and company town halls. Malcolm turned back toward them, and something in his expression had changed. He was still calm, still controlled, but now the calm had direction. "When I was 12, he said, my mother taught me to keep my hands visible in stores. When I was 16, my father taught me to answer every question like I was already being judged. When I was 22, I had a law firm partner ask if I was in the right conference room while I was holding the presentation he had asked me to write. He gave a small pause, no bitterness in it, only memory. I built this company because I believed structure could become fairness if enough decent people insisted on it." Dana leaned back slowly, as though the room had shifted under her. Malcolm stepped away from the window and rested against the edge of the table. "This is not about humiliating one officer," he said. "It is about exposing the reflex that made her confidence possible. If we reduce this to one bad night, then we protect the habit that created it." The legal attorney finally looked up. "Then the response cannot be only legal," he said. "It has to be moral." Malcolm met his gaze and nodded once. "Exactly." A long hush followed, but it was not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes before people decide whether they will merely witness truth or align themselves with it. In the hallway beyond the glass, staff members moved past with lowered voices and tablets pressed to their sides. Somewhere down the corridor a copier stopped, and started again. Life continued in small office sounds, but inside the room every breath seemed louder. Ava cleared her throat. "If you speak publicly," she said, "people are going to listen differently because it happened to you." Malcolm looked at her with surprising warmth. "No," he said gently. "They are going to listen differently because this time the man they dismissed owns the building they were standing in." No one argued with that. No one could. He picked up the city statement from the table and held it between both hands, reading the first line once more as if confirming that deception really could look this polished in daylight. Then he folded the paper neatly, set it down, and said, "Schedule the press conference for 4 o'clock. We will not raise our voice. We will not exaggerate. We will tell the truth so clearly that even the people hiding from it will recognize themselves." At 3:56, the lobby of Hayes Urban Systems no longer felt like part of a private company. It felt like the front edge of a city argument. Camera tripods stood in clean rows beneath the high glass ceiling. Reporters adjusted earpieces and checked notes on their phones. Security officers moved with quiet efficiency along the marble perimeter, their polished shoes making soft clicks that disappeared into the low murmur of waiting voices. Outside, vans from local stations lined the curb in a row of white rectangles under the late afternoon sun. Inside, the light had changed again. It entered the building in long amber sheets now, warming the stone floors and making the brass edges of the reception desk glow, but nothing about the atmosphere was gentle. Near the rear corridor, behind a frosted glass partition, Officer Emily Carter stood with her union representative and a lieutenant from the department, watching the room fill through a narrow, clear strip in the glass. She had been told she was there only to observe, not to speak, not to approach, not to offer a statement beyond the one already submitted. Even so, she had insisted on coming. Perhaps she had thought she still needed context. Perhaps she had thought there was something left that could make the day less final than it already felt. Her uniform was gone. She wore a plain gray blazer and a white blouse, but without the badge and patrol belt. She somehow looked less civilian than before, as though authority had not been removed so much as exposed. On the other side of the glass, Dana Brooks stood near the podium with a printed statement in one hand, speaking quietly into a headset, while legal staff moved along the edges of the crowd. Ava Reed was there too, off to one side, fingers clasped around a paper cup she had barely touched. Luis Moreno remained near the main entrance, broad shoulders still, eyes alert. Then the elevator doors opened. Malcolm Hayes stepped out alone. Conversation in the lobby dropped. By half without anyone asking it to. He wore a midnight blue suit now, darker than the one from morning, and the bandage near his mouth had been replaced with a small skin-colored strip that did not hide the bruise so much as acknowledge it. He did not look toward the cameras first. He looked toward the employees gathered at the back of the room, the reception staff, the assistants, the maintenance crew, the people who usually disappeared behind the architecture of a place like this. He gave them a slight nod before walking to the podium. Emily saw it. More than that, she saw their faces in response. Not fear, not performance. Respect. Real respect. The kind that cannot be demanded because it has already been earned over years in rooms no camera ever enters. Something tightened in her chest. It was not only that she had been wrong about who he was. It was that she had been wrong about what dignity looked like. Malcolm placed both hands lightly on the podium and waited until the room settled into complete silence. When he began speaking, his voice was low enough that every reporter leaned forward. Yesterday evening, he said, I was treated as suspicious before I was treated as human. No flourish, no anger, just truth, laid down clean. He spoke for less than 7 minutes. He described the assumption before the encounter, the danger of reflex disguised as professionalism, the cost of being misread in a country where being misread could still alter the course of a life. Then he did something Emily had not expected. He mentioned the Police Reform Scholarship Fund. He mentioned the Body Camera Initiative. He mentioned his meetings with city leadership over the past 2 years, and his belief that reform was possible when accountability and dignity moved together. He did not say the department was beyond repair. He said the opposite. That was the moment something in Emily finally gave way. Because if he had come to bury her, she might have defended herself inside anger. But he had not come to destroy. He had come to tell the truth without hatred. And standing behind the glass, stripped of excuse, she understood with terrible clarity that the man she had reduced in a matter of seconds had spent years trying to improve the very institution she had hidden behind. When the press conference ended, the lobby did not erupt. It exhaled. Reporters lowered their microphones one by one, not because the story had lost heat, but because Malcolm Hayes had taken all the noise out of it. He had not pleaded. He had not performed outrage. He had simply placed the truth in the center of the room and let everyone decide what kind of person they would be in relation to it. The questions that followed came fast anyway. Was he demanding termination? Was he filing suit? Did he believe the officer had acted out of racial bias? Malcolm answered each one with the same measured calm. Accountability is not revenge, he said. If we confuse those two things, then no one learns anything and nothing changes. Across the lobby, behind the frosted partition, Emily Carter felt those words land harder than any accusation could have. Her union representative had spent the last hour whispering strategies about procedure, public statements, and language that would reduce liability, but standing there with her hands folded so tightly the tips of her fingers had gone white, Emily realized every strategy sounded like hiding. Through the clear strip in the glass, she watched Malcolm step away from the podium while employees moved around him carefully, almost protectively, not crowding him, just making space as if dignity itself needed room to pass. Dana spoke to a producer near the entrance. Luis guided a camera crew back behind the rope line. Ava stood still for a moment, staring at Malcolm with the kind of look people wear when they realize courage is quieter than they had imagined. Then, before the lieutenant could stop her, Emily opened the side door and stepped into the lobby. A few heads turned immediately. The shift in the room was subtle but real, like the temperature changing by 2 degrees. Malcolm had just accepted a bottle of water from Dana when he saw her approaching. He did not move away. He did not harden. He simply watched, his face unreadable in the warm late light pouring through the glass. Emily stopped 6 feet from him, close enough to speak, far enough to show she understood she had not earned anything more. Up close, the bruise near his mouth was impossible to ignore. So was the steadiness in his eyes. For a second her training, her pride, and every instinct to protect herself fought for control of her voice. Then all 3 failed. I was wrong, she said. The sentence came out thinner than she expected, stripped of rank and certainty. She swallowed and tried again. I was wrong before I ever spoke to you. The lobby had gone almost completely silent. Even the reporters hanging back near the doors seemed to understand that the room no longer belonged to them. Emily did not cry. Somehow that made it more difficult to witness. She looked like a person standing unarmed in front of the truth for the first time. I told myself I was reading a situation, she said, but I was reading you. Your face, your presence, your skin, and I turned that into permission to treat you like you did not belong where you were standing. Dana lowered her eyes. Louise stood motionless near the rope line. Ava pressed a hand lightly against her mouth. Malcolm listened without interruption. That alone seemed to unsteady Emily further. I do not expect forgiveness, she said. I do not even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I needed to say it where no report could clean it up. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice remained as calm as it had been in the rain. You were right about one thing, he said. This is bigger than one night. Emily blinked, caught off guard. Malcolm took a small step closer, not enough to comfort her, only enough to make sure she heard him clearly. If you mean what you just said, then do not apologize only to me. Tell the truth to the people who trained you to trust instinct when instinct had never been examined. Tell the truth to the people who still call this professionalism. His eyes never left hers. That is where your apology starts. Something in Emily's face broke open then, not into tears, but into recognition. Not of what she had lost, of what she had been part of. She nodded once, slowly, like a person agreeing to walk into weather she could no longer avoid. And Malcolm, instead of turning away in triumph, simply stepped aside and let the silence do what anger could not. By the time evening settled over the city, the glass walls of Hayes Urban Systems had turned into mirrors, holding the last gold of the sun for a few quiet minutes before giving it back to the dark. The lobby had mostly emptied. The reporters were gone. The cables had been coiled. The bright white station vans had pulled away from the curb one by one, leaving only the reflection of traffic sliding across the marble floor in thin ribbons of red and amber. Somewhere near the elevators, a janitor moved a mop bucket with slow, steady wheels. The sound was small, almost tender. Malcolm Hayes stood alone near the front windows with his jacket folded over one arm and his tie loosened at the collar. The bruise near his mouth had deepened into a muted shade beneath the skin, but his face held none of the strain the day had tried to place there. He looked tired now, yes, but not diminished. If anything, the long hours had stripped everything unnecessary away and left only the shape of the man himself, clear and solid and difficult to misunderstand. Behind him, Dana finished speaking with legal and quietly gathered the last of the papers from the reception desk. Louise checked the locks at the side entrance. Ava, on her way out, paused near the revolving doors and looked back once. Malcolm noticed and gave her the smallest nod. She smiled, not broadly, just enough to show relief, then stepped into the night. A few seconds later, the lobby returned to silence. Malcolm stayed where he was, watching his own reflection hover faintly against the darkening street beyond the glass. For the first time all day, there was nothing to answer, nothing to sign, nothing to hold together for anyone else. Just the hush of climate control, the faint smell of polished stone, and the sound of his own breathing evening out in the stillness. He thought about the parking lot in the rain. He thought about the first look, the first assumption, the first sentence spoken before truth had even been given the chance to arrive. He thought about Emily Carter standing in the lobby without a badge, speaking more honestly than the report had. He did not confuse honesty with repair. He knew better than that. Some harm did not disappear because it had finally been named. But naming still mattered. Lightly, almost absent-mindedly, he touched the edge of the bandage near his mouth and then let his hand fall. The front doors whispered open behind him. Malcolm turned. Emily stood just inside the threshold. No union representative now, no lieutenant, no shield of institution around her at all. She had changed into a plain navy coat, and the wind had lifted a few strands of hair loose around her face. In one hand, she held a folded document. She did not step too close. I signed the amended statement, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. I corrected the record. I asked for the body camera footage and Ava Reed's video to be attached in full. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, then at the paper in her hand. She placed it on the reception desk between them and stepped back. I do not know what happens to me now, she said. Malcolm glanced toward the dark windows, where both their reflections stood side by side for a brief second in the glass, equal only in silhouette. Then he looked at her again. What happens next should be true, he said. That is enough for tonight. Emily lowered her eyes and nodded once. No apology this time. No defense. Just acceptance. She turned and walked back through the doors into the cold city air, her figure shrinking into the blue-gray evening until the street swallowed her. Malcolm remained where he was. Outside, the wind moved along the sidewalk and stirred a few damp leaves against the curb. Inside, the lobby lights glowed softly over stone, brass, and glass, and in that quiet reflection of order, justice did not look loud or triumphant. It looked like a man standing still, breathing evenly, while the world around him finally learned how to see him clearly.